My name is Grayson Lewis, and I am the new Peer Recovery Supports Coordinator at NIMSAS Recovery Center. I'm also a woman in long-term recovery, which for me means no alcohol and drugs since August of 2014. And I love recovery because it has given me hope for my life and purpose, meaning, things that I never imagined that I would have when I was still in my active use. Which one do you see? Are you seeing my thing with all the notes, or do you see the one over here? It's being fussy today.
I don't see your notes. It looks like it's in, you're good. You're in presenter mode.
Cool. Good, good. I don't want my notes have to be a secret. So you think that I'm just spouting all of this like eloquent and intellectually structured arguments out of my head. No notes here going on. So stigma is a difficult topic, and I feel like we talk about it a lot, but somehow we still don't talk about it enough. Stigma and the words that we use matter so much. They matter on an individual level, and they matter on a societal level. These words and ideas shape our core beliefs. They get passed on from one generation to the next. And some people even benefit from these entrenched stigmas, which I think is part of the reason why we really have such a hard time fighting this stuff. And making small changes in the words we use publicly and privately can honestly change the world. So we all work in the field. We're pretty familiar with stigma. I am trying personally to even get away from the word stigma because I feel like we have gone beyond stigma and this is prejudice. So some definitions of stigma: they are social constructs. They're not real. We create them within our society. And they all have a purpose. They have a deeper meaning than just to separate socially and be like, oh, those people aren't like me. They're different than I am. Maybe I'm better than they are. But they actually serve to maintain the status quo in a whole bunch of different systems. So William White, who is a very well-known addiction and recovery historian and researcher, identified 5 social institutions that actually benefit from the stigma surrounding substance use disorder. And those are the media, the criminal justice system, the child welfare system, alcohol and pharmaceutical industries, and the addiction treatment industries. So by keeping these concepts and words alive, we're playing into the hands of those with the money and power who want to perpetuate these systems. These stigmas create political and economic advantages for some groups while holding other groups at a disadvantage. Some groups have the power and privilege and some do not. Some institutions are receiving a whole ton of money to treat these issues. And so the focus shifts from it being like a social issue, a family issue, a small town issue, something we can address and work to fix, to something that we need to rely on the criminal justice system, the child welfare system. They become issues that are not tackleable by people like us, and they get shunted over into these other systems to address it. And I think we see how well that is working out. And it's not very well. I haven't worked in the field for a very long time. So just finding out the kind of funding that goes to something as small as addiction treatment, because out of those different things that I listed, the media, the criminal justice, the prison systems, like, the treatment resources are pretty small. But when you start putting dollar signs on how much money is going to that kind of thing. I mean, it blows my mind. So the focus has to be on changing this from a crisis that other people don't have to a public health crisis. And I think we've seen that a lot more with the opioid crisis. Things have changed a little more. It's become a lot more public, but we still have a ways to go. So what we call a problem is a part of the problem. The language we use is so vitally important. I was a communications major in college, so I'm fascinated by the words that we choose to use and how they impact the other person and how we interpret their meaning through words. I think they're kind of magical. And if we're not intentional and deliberate about the words we use, we can serve to just make things worse with the best of intentions. So modern culture has used stigmas to denote devalued social categories. So those are categories like cons, an ex-con, a former prisoner, ideas like once an addict, always an addict. They never change. Stigma robs people of rightful life opportunities. So, for example, people with felonies have a hard time getting jobs, getting apartments, college funding. And that is stigma-based. That has nothing to do with their specific felony or their crime or extenuating circumstances or any other factor of who that person is. Credit score, income, those are not taken into consideration at all. Stigma interacts with illness and exposes people to distorted experiences with criminal/mental health/medical treatment. I feel like that could be an entire presentation. If you've ever talked to someone in recovery about their experiences going to places like the ER or asking a medical professional for help, I find that deeply saddening that is one of the largest areas that still seems to be dragging their feet is the medical community. Because it seems like they should be the ones who are on the front lines of new researches, new treatments, new modalities, but instead there's just all this buildup, this discrimination of negative emotions. So things are not being healed. And that leads directly to healthcare systems withholding appropriate services. I've seen a big push nowadays for doctors in ERs to begin treating people in withdrawal, treating people in psychosis. And isn't it just absurd that this has to become a subject that we need to rally around? Is doctors treating people with this disorder like they're a human being, a patient? It blows my mind. So William White also said our words can be used to empower or disempower. We can build people up or we can break them down. We can humanize or we can objectify. We can engender compassion or fear and hatred. We can unite or we can create enmity. I like that word. And these are simple things, simple word choices that change the individual's lives and can change how society works. So the language we choose is vitally important. If you want to care for something, you call it a flower. If you want to kill something, you call it a weed. And we see that all the time. Your perception is everything. It's because some weeds are beautiful, but if you call it a weed, you don't really care for it the same way you would care for it if you call it a flower. So the word substance abuse, oh, what a hot button issue. The people in recovery that I know hate this term, even though it's still so frequently used, because the word abuse implies choice. that we are actively abusing substances, making that choice regularly. Also, it doesn't make sense. I hear a lot of jokes like, oh, I never abused my substance. I took really good care of it. It was my number one priority. I knew where it was and took care of it well. And I've got a note here that in 1973, the National Commission on Marijuana and Drug Abuse criticized the word abuse, saying that it would only serve to confuse public attitudes about drug using behaviors. And since that report, the word has flourished. I regularly still hear professionals say substance abuse. It's still very common. Even the term drink responsibly has the implication that people with alcohol use disorder are just drinking irresponsibly. They're making the choice to drink irresponsibly. So the root of the abuse thing implies willful misconduct, that they just went out and did something to themselves, knowing full well the risk, when in reality, most of us engaged in activities that were culturally very normal. As teenagers, we participated in these celebrations, these customs, traditions that were common. And no, I'll talk about that later. So the word abuse has just created this host of false perceptions and myths about alcohol and drug users. And it foils attempts to draft meaningful policies that will better serve communities, because this isn't a public health issue, it's just a bad choice that people are making. And it absolves the alcohol and pharmaceutical industries of any wrongdoing, because it provides them full access to saturate the social markets with products that are potentially addictive, and with the exception of a few cases, without warnings. I think alcohol only has warnings on it for pregnant women drinking. So cigarettes have a little sticker like, warning, nicotine can be an addictive chemical. But none of our alcohol bottles say anything like that. And I don't think I've ever seen a label quite like that on a prescription bottle either. Warning, this drug can be habit forming. Kind of interesting that has never happened. So keeping this system that abusing drugs is the only way to become addictive, it makes it possible for us to practice these incredible incarceration rates, because that's our solution. If someone gets in trouble from making these choices, then it's only appropriate to punish them for making the negative choice. And there is actually no research done at all that shows that you have to abuse alcohol or drugs to acquire the disease of addiction. That is assumed. You can use nicotine or alcohol responsibly, legally, and still become addicted. The very agencies that were created to help people with addictive illnesses have actually helped to create a culture that vilifies the people that they were asked to help, with all the labeling and this attitude of only we can help, only we have the systems in place to help people. If your person is making this choice, send them to us and we can help. And that is not going so well for us. Did we already see this slide? I feel like this is a repeat. Maybe not. So having the terms that everyone is really familiar with. If I asked everyone to unmute and name some terms to describe those with alcohol or substance use disorders, I think we can all guess the kind of lists that we would make. And unfortunately, it implies all of these other things. The stigma is implied for anyone with these disorders. We have deficient characters. We're self-inflicted this disease on ourselves. We made the choice. We can't be trusted with jobs or choosing our own treatment. Where we'll go to treatment, what treatment will be most effective for us. Those decisions are taken out of our hands. Getting to know more about how the words, how the images are used for this kind of this broader picture, not even just the one-on-one aspect, but as a society, as a people, approving pictures like this is awful. This is awful. Look at the face of the addicted person there. It's just like the mindless, staring eyes, just like willingly opening their mouth wide to get hooked. And that's on the cover of Time magazine. Just imagine like the layers of approval that had to go through. And that's the media profiting from this image. Even though it says how we get addicted, the implication is how other people get addicted. Because none of us are going to look at that and relate and be like, oh, yeah, that image reminds me of myself. No, that's clearly other people that look like that. So really having that understanding about the importance of the words we use and getting to see kind of that meta picture and not just seeing the impact of stigma on one person. I feel like if you choose a derogatory term for somebody and you say it, or you don't think they'll overhear you and you say it, you can see that effect on the person pretty clearly. Most of the time, depending on the word. Maybe substance abuse is a little less harmful, but we can kind of see that impact more clearly in front of us. But seeing the larger picture and how these companies and industries profit off of promoting that stigma kind of changes your opinion on it, I think. Like, to be an advocate, this is about more than just speaking up for the individual person's feelings and rights, but about starting to challenge these deeply held beliefs that have been in our society for so long that I feel like people feel like, how can I even challenge that? How can we change the stigma? There's too much stigma here. We can't even start to change it. And that's why it's so important to start to change the narrative into that idea of this is not a crisis of bad people, of bad drugs like fentanyl infecting our society and taking away our children. It's a public health crisis. They are things that we as a people can address and help with. It's not something we need to rely on a mega corporation to handle. So we ask people to rethink their beliefs about addiction, not in terms of active addiction, because the media reminds us daily of what that looks like, but the root causes of addiction. In a sense, the opioid epidemic is our path to social enlightenment. People are beginning to understand that addiction is much more sinister than first believed and occurs in the lives of good people. So people do not choose addiction. Most people who drink or use drugs don't end up addicted. even if they engage in harmful use over a period of time, like many teenagers do. And the teenagers, I think, kind of understand that. Because they have been conditioned to think that addiction is willful and only happens to people who are irresponsible and negligent. So they are making decisions about whether to drink or use with bad information because they think that it's possible to drink responsibly and still stay safe. Recovery is self-directed. People in recovery are capable of making their own decisions about their treatment, about what treatments they want to use, as long as they have good information. You know, knowledge is really the kryptonite to stigma. As long as they have good information about what their options are, what the alternatives are, people in recovery are fully capable of making these decisions. But as long as we feel like we need to step in and make those decisions for them, that perpetuates this idea of people being helpless. Recovery is finding positive attachments, self-discovery. You know, we don't have to prepare people for life in a predetermined pathway. Treatment process is an opportunity to connect people with their own beliefs and values, activities that engage their interest, connect with social groups that they are interested in. Educating people on long-term recovery. This hits home for me because I believe I was in recovery for 5 or 6 years before I knew about a lot of the options for multiple pathways. I came up in the era of there's AA, and if you are lucky, there might be NA, and that was it. I had no idea that there were other groups. And I will always have my roots in 12-step meetings, but just knowing that there are other things and knowing that I had that gap, that 5-year gap in recovery before I started hearing about those other groups is crazy because this wasn't my first rodeo and I was completely unaware of those options. And that's the kind of thing that happens routinely. By our silence, others will define us. That's a big one because I feel like people in recovery have been very quiet for a long time. I think the latest stat is 24 million Americans in active recovery in the United States, but you don't hear from us very much. Well, you guys do because you're in the field, so you get to see us all the time because we're in your face yelling about what we want you to do. I feel like the mainstream public has no idea. It's pretty quiet. Unfortunately, healthy change takes time. It takes time and small steps. As much as we may want to pick it, it doesn't always happen that way. Advocacy can be very quiet and very scared, but just speaking up and saying, no, those terms don't apply anymore. That's the old way. And we can do that for our next generation, which I know is all about what you guys do in prevention. The reality is that the majority of people suffering from addiction are good people. Our family members, friends, coworkers, church members, rich and poor, they equally represent the members of our communities.